occurs from time to time. But the point that we must make is that the current situation as it stands, where the ad hoc deployments outstrips the ordered activities, naturally implies that the Defense Force is utilized and stressed dangerously to be in action in some instances without being adequately or sufficiently prepared or equipped for what it is expected to do. The ad hoc deployments, they speak to the amount of resources of money that is spent by the SANDF in relation to operations versus the preparation and the equipping of the force, which is capital expenditure and the spending on human resource. Because as members of the committee would remember, ideally, the convention that has been guiding the SANDF is that the budget will have the ratio of what we spend on capital equipment systems for the Defense Force versus the money we spend on operations and the money we spend on human resource, preparing the soldiers that must execute, and to make sure that they are all at all times in a happy space. Those ratios are very important for us to keep. However, the present situation of the last 3 to 4 years has not allowed us much luxury with respect to that. The deployments that were ad hoc, honorable members will see for themselves, were very vital, were very urgent taskings. The Defense Force could not have said no to that because we are not prepared. Arising out of that, we do have a concern that in its activities, the Defense Force is in a concerning way becoming an organization that is not at all times fit for purpose, the way the Constitution requires it to be. The last point that I want to just flag for the committee members for noting, as the officials will now take you through the details, is that the National SANDF, our South African National Defense Force budget, has no contingencies accommodated in it. And therefore, in situations where it is deployed on ad hoc basis out of dire need, if there are no reimbursements by Treasury, by National Treasury, we are actually further sinking the ship. And I'm going to ask honorable members, for instance, to look at the deployments that were undertaken on humanitarian grounds in Mozambique, in Malawi, in Zimbabwe, deployments which we were not reimbursed for, but those were politically ordered ad hoc interventions. And lastly, still on that point, to say that our documents, when you look at them, may raise, some questions, because the figures of what is appropriated budgets-wise for activities and what has been spent, in a number of areas, the figures are the same. And in the real world out there, we know that you never spend to the T what you have received. Just to say to honorable members that in those areas where you make such observations, bear in mind that we are talking about budgets which were spent first and figures were submitted for reimbursement. And therefore the correlation of what was budgeted for and what was spent would be the same. And that is the context that explains why the books would look like that. But of course, there are other areas where we also, in discussion with the department, we have asked the accounting officers team to drill into the details to satisfy ourselves that indeed, in those years, the appropriate budgets were indeed spent to the T, not because they were reimbursements. And if that is the case, what would have been the reason? We have raised that. With that said, Chair, let me invite the Acting Secretary for Defense with his team to take the committee through the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, DM. You have summarized the issues very well and refocused the attention of the department there too. SecDef, Acting SecDef.
Thank you once more, Chairs, and thank you to the members of the Joint Standing Committee, DM. I will ask Mr. Abut, the Acting CFO, to take the committee through the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ponsi, please, the platform is yours. Colleagues, you'll see that he's going to present an updated version. After I received the first document, I reached out to him and asked him to update it a bit. So I was doing it on your behalf, basically to the first presentation was high level. I asked him to drill down into, some detail so that, to make the exchange between us and the department on matters finance much more productive. Over to you, Mr. Aponsi.
Thank you, Chairs. Thank you to the members of the Joint Standing Committee on Defense, the Deputy Minister. Chair, I would just like to confirm whether if my slides are moving.
Yes, they are moving, sir.
Thank you so much, Sir Chair. Members of the Joint Standing Committee, as the Chair has indicated, we did change our presentation earlier on this morning, and our apologies for that, but it was based on discussions that we had this morning with the Chair, and also based on guidance we received from the Deputy Minister. So our presentation initially dealt with comprehensive, or basically it was summarized figures with regard to the presentation that we made to you earlier. So the Chair did indicate that we should consider breaking down the figures so that it's a bit easier to understand and not a consolidated figure. So what we've tried to do now is to break down the figures for the compensation of employees so that it makes it easier for the members to understand what is made up of that, because a bulk of the figures or a bulk of the expenditure on deployments come out of compensation of employees and goods and services. But when it comes to goods and services, the line items are approximately almost 20 per item or per expenditure item. So that becomes a bit too much to present to the committee. It would take us more than 4 hours if we drilled it down to that level. But we'll be able to summarize for you in terms of what makes up the compensation of employees, and what makes up the goods and services. Members of the Joint Standard Committee, we approximately had about 13 deployments for the last 3-4 years. And 4 of them are audit commitments. And then the difference of the 9 are ad hoc commitments or ad hoc deployments that we're tasked to do. Most of them will relate to a specific year, to specific disasters, or over a 2-year period. So our presentation will cover from 2019 to 2020 financial year to the 2022-2023 financial year. We've tried to give you the figures over the last 4 years, including the current year and where we've spent so far as at mid of January 2023. When we start off with the audit commitments, the first one deals with Operation Corona. So for Operation Corona from 2019-2020 financial year, we received 954 million for the first year. We spent just over $1 billion. Then in 2020-2021, we received 1 billion and we spent exactly that figure that we received. And I'll explain to you why the figures are almost similar to what was appropriated. Then for the 2022-2023 financial year, we received 1.2 billion for Op Corona, and we've currently expensed 961 million of that. Now, the balance of approximately 280 million, we hope to spend it within the next 2 months. Even though we are currently at the end of February, most expenses will only be captured during this month of February and the month of March. So that should be able to, we should be able to spend a bulk of the 1.2 billion that was appropriated by National Treasury in terms of Op Corona. The detail, as I indicated, of, if we can just maybe concentrate on the current year, of the 1.2 billion that we received specifically for compensation of employees, which makes up 833 million. So the 833 million is the first line of the compensation of employees for the 2022-2023 financial year, and we expend 703 million. So on this slide, it gives you the detail of what that expense of compensation of employees is made up. And if you look at this slide, a bulk of it relates to allowances. So a bulk of our transactions within the compensation of employees are danger and special danger allowances, deprivation allowances, circumstantial allowances, and mainly standby allowances. So the figures will show you out of 703 million expensed for the 2022-2023 financial year, 201 million of that. Members, if you could concentrate on the last block, the last column. So 201 million of that relates to deprivation allowance. 117 million relates to deprivation allowance for reserves. And if we come all the way down to the bottom, there's a 285 million. That is just above the 703 million. That relates to wages for the reserves. So members of the committee, this will actually show you that our reserve forces supplement the regular forces. If we go back to deprivation allowance and standby allowances, it's 201 million compared to 117 million for the reserves. So our deprivation allowances that were paid for the regular forces is 201 million compared to 117 million for the reserves. And the salaries for the regular forces will not be here because they are already paid a salary to be deployed. So you will only see the wages, which is right at the bottom, of 285 million for the reserves. So most of the slides I will go through will follow that kind of explanation and kind of detail in terms of the expenditure. The next one is Op Mistral. So Op Mistral in 2019-2020, we spent we received 849 million and we spent 801. So across, you will be able to see from Mistral, our expenditure in most cases is just a little below the appropriated amount. In the current year, which is 2022-2023, the appropriated amount is 862. It's 862 million and expenditure is 674 million. And as explained in terms of Corona, these expenses will be expensed almost fully before the end of the financial year. The next slide will deal with the detail of it again, which is also in the categories of allowances for deprivation, circumstantial, standby allowances. And again, if you look at this, you will see 308 million on the last column for 2022, 308 million for deprivation allowance for regular forces versus 2.6 million for deprivation allowance for reserves. And then you come all the way down to the bottom, just above the 366 million. There's a 4.2 million for wages for reserves. So this also proves that for Mistral, we just have the reserves to supplement the regular forces. The next slide deals with OpCopper. OpCopper for the 2019-2020 financial year, the first column, we received 8.3 million. We spent the entire 8.3 million. The following year was 5.9 million versus 5.9 million. And then there was a 31 million in 21-22, which was based on expenditure that was, or claims that were not expensed in the 2020-2021 financial year, that was expended the next year. Hence, these are the 31,000 that is showing there. Then you look at the current year, 2022-2023 of 16 million. So we've been appropriated 16 million for that year for OpCopper, but we have not yet utilized that money. And at the end of the presentation, we'll explain what we do with those that we haven't expensed, because there are some operations that are not funded or fully funded. So we utilize the underfunding or overfunding for some projects where there were savings to augment the other specific operations that may not have enough funds in, such as Vikela and Corona. Then on OpCopper.
Sorry, if you may unscramble the names, so because there are people watching this who may not be familiar with the names we are giving to these deployments, just to indicate where these people are deployed, so that they get a sense of what we're talking about by Operation Copper, Operation Corona, and so on.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks so
Operation
much.
Corona deals with border safeguarding. So it's our troops that we deploy to the border lines across the entire South Africa with our neighboring countries. OpCopper deals with anti-piracy in the Mozambican Channel. So if we look at OpCopper, the 16 million that I was explaining, and we look at the detail of that. So if we concentrate on the last year again, it's also based on allowances. So those danger allowances that was appropriated for 838,000. There was deprivation allowance for regular forces for 12 million. Then there was standby allowance for regular forces for 1.7 million. As explained, this we have not yet expensed anything in OpCopper yet. And that was because of the lack of ships that that are not alongside yet for us to be able to deploy for anti-piracy within the Mozambique Channel. Then the next one deals with OpCordite. OpCordite is an operation we held in the Sudan, but that operation ended around 2020, 2021. So we're not really deploying in OpCordite anymore, which is our operation in Sudan. And that's, we received for the first 2019-2020 financial year, 1.4 million. The following year was 1.4 million. And then the 618, just 618 Rand was based on an allowance that had to be paid to someone in the next year. The other reason why the expenditure is almost exactly like what was appropriated, because a lot of these operations, we do not receive the funding before we deploy. Most of these are given to us by National Treasury during the adjustment budget of November, December. So we do expense first, and then I don't want to use the word reimburse, but for the lack of a better word, then the National Treasury reimburses us. So we basically move money around between all the different operations to be able to fund what we have been deployed for until National Treasury gives us the money or appropriates the money back to the department. The details of OpCordite also deals with danger and special allowances for regular forces. deprivation allowance for regular forces, and standby allowance for regular forces. So basically on Cordite, when Cordite we deployed in Cordite, we hardly utilized any reserve force members. Chair and members, those are the 4 ordered commitments that we have. The next slides deal with the 9 ad hoc deployments. And these are mainly based on disasters or when there is a specific tasking that is required by the Defense Force, then the Department of Defense gets deployed. The first one deals with Op-Ditaba. This was our first repatriation of during the COVID period where we had to repatriate our South African citizens from China. So the compensation of employees was 1.4 million, and then the goods and services was 14 million. Just to give members a bit of background to the goods and services, and I'm sure members do recall when we had to deploy in 2020 to pick up our members, our citizens from China, we had to charter SAA. That was the only flight available then to go to Wuhan, plus our soldiers to go and pick up our citizens. So including that 14 million is a chartering of SAA to China to Wuhan to pick up our people. And the compensation of employees will dealt with allowances again, deprivation allowance. And if you do recall, during that time, everybody was scared. Nobody knew what to do. So a lot of it had to do with the deprivation allowance and the standby allowances for the soldiers that we sent, the doctors that we sent, and the medical staff that we had to send to Wuhan to pick up our citizens. The next one deals with Op-Notlela. Op-Notlela basically deals with the COVID-19 related expenses. So for that specific year, we received 876 million. There was a lot of money we received, almost in excess of 3 billion for Op-Notlela, but a bulk of it dealt with the acquisition of PPEs, the purchase of PPEs, and also the purchase of any equipment with regard to managing the COVID-19 expenses. But this slide deals mainly with the actual.
Chair. Yes, may I know that?
Chair, I don't know whether it's on my side, and it seems now I can't hear, the presenter now.
Yes, we can hear him clearly, at least on this side. Colleagues, can you hear the presenter?
Yes, sir, I can hear him very clearly.
Yes,
he's still audible, yeah, he is.
Yes, please attend to your gadget, Mr. Shelembe.
Okay.
Thank you very much. All right, you may go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair. So Op-Notlela dealt with the COVID-19 related expenses. So the details of this relates to allowances, S&T allowances, and obviously the deprivation allowances, the standby allowances. So the next slide, and maybe before we go on to the next slide and the details thereof. So a bulk of our expenses for Op-Notlela was in the 2020-2021 financial year and 2021-2022 financial year. But a bulk of it was during the heart of the COVID, which was 2020 and 2021. Hence the 876 million and the 8.6 million for the next year. So the details thereof are deprivation allowances again for regular forces, danger allowances, because when we had to deploy our soldiers on the streets, danger allowance was extremely critical, just like deprivation allowance. So a lot of that transaction, 334 million and 153 million relates to that. Then again, Chair and members of the Joint Standing Committee, you can actually also see that a bulk of the transactions relate to regular forces and not necessarily the reserves. So it's 334 million for deprivation allowance versus 153 million for the reserves. And that also boils down back to the allowances and the standby allowances. So it's almost a third of what we spent. So basically it's 1:3 on each of our transactions with regard to the reserve forces supporting the regular forces. So that's for Op-Notlela, the COVID-19 related expenses. The next one deals with Op-Litolo. Op-Litolo deals with extension of COVID-19. So when we had finalized basically when the COVID-19 had subsided, we created Op-Litolo to manage the expenses with regard to COVID-19. And the bulk of them had to do with goods and services. So that's where we had to buy specific things, PPEs to support or to finalize the COVID-19 related expenses. So that is what those transactions are for. Then we went on, the next slide deals with Op Indiza. Op Indiza deals with the Mozambican floods. This was in 2019-2020. We were deployed to Mozambique to assist the Mozambicans during the flood period. And that deals with goods and services, mainly SNT, and then compensation of employees. Again, the next slide will give you a bit of detail. So the next slide dealt with allowances again, deprivation allowances for regular forces of 2.6 million, and then deprivation allowance for reserves of 59 million, and then standby allowance of 378,000, and standby allowance for the reserves of 8,000 Rand. So that was Op Indiza, our assistance to the Mozambican channel. The next one deals with Op Ukuwela, which is the Zimbabwe floods. So we had to assist the Zimbabweans during the 2019-2020 financial year, where there were floods in Zimbabwe, and our soldiers were deployed to go and assist our members out there. We also had to build bridges to assist the Zimbabweans. So that's, we incurred 34 million in the 2019-2020 financial year, and 2020-2021 was 778,000 Rand. And a bulk of it, a bulk of that money that will lie under goods and services will be related to the cost incurred in the building of the bridges and the materials we had to buy for that. And then the compensation of employees will deal with the allowances, the deprivation allowance of 13 million for regular forces. And if members will note, we also did not expend any money on reserves. We use our own regular forces in the building of the bridges. And that was through our works formation and our engineer call that assisted with Op Ukuwela. Our next slide deals with Op Ukunono Pela. This was in Malawi, the floods in Malawi. So the floods in Malawi that we also had to assist. A bulk of these assistance for the floods was all in 2019-2020. So it was Mozambique, it was Malawi, and it was Zimbabwe. So this also follows the same reasoning. We also built bridges to assist the Malawians, and we also incurred deprivation allowances with regard to the expenses that we incurred. And this is the detail thereof. So there was SNT, there was foreign SNT that we incurred for this operation, and then there was the deprivation allowance for our regular forces. Chair, the next one deals with Op Prosper. Op Prosper deals with the unrest that we had in 2021. So it's mainly the unrest we had in KZN, in Gauteng during 2021. And that also dealt with, we received 92 million for the 2019-2020 financial year. That's when the first unrest started. And then a bulk of it was in 21-22, which was the money that we received for assistance during the July unrest. And again, when we go to the next slide, it will be mainly on deprivation allowances and on SNT. Now, the other challenge we had was towards the end of last year, in December last year, we had to deploy to ESCOM. We're tasked to deploy our members to ESCOM. We costed approximately 206 million. And this was based on the taskings given by the president to deploy about 2,700 of our soldiers. And we were not funded by National Treasury. National Treasury indicated they'll not be able to fund this specific deployment because it was not their responsibility. We had to get into a memorandum of understanding with ESCOM, and ESCOM has reimbursed the Department of Defense for deploying to safeguard the power plants and the power stations. And that is a concern because as a department, it was not budgeted for, but we were tasked. So that becomes a bit of a challenge. So some of these savings from the other deployments, we actually have to utilize those now to boost the ESCOM related deployments. For now, we've expensed 37 million so far. but we haven't captured yet on the system the allowances for the month of January and February. So once that is captured, the cost will go a bit more higher than the 37 million that we're currently sitting on from December and part of January. The details of OpProsper for that specific year that I'm speaking of, the biggest amount is 10 million for deprivation allowance, 4 million for deprivation allowance for the reserves, 3 million for standby allowance, and 1.2 million for the standby allowance for the reserves. But in the unrest in 2020-2021, a bulk of the figures will come or came out of deprivation allowance for our reserves and our regular forces. And then wages of 150 million for our reserves when we deploy them to KZN and to Gauteng. Chair, the next slide deals with Op Vikela. Op Vikela is our deployment to Mozambique with regard to the SAMIM deployment. And this costs us a little bit of money. This deployment started in 2021-2022 financial year. What is not on the slide is money that we have to pay to the standby force of SADC, which is approximately 13.5 million a year that the Department of Defense or South Africa has to contribute to the SADC Secretariat for Standby Force Deployment in Mozambique. And this relates to all the SADC countries that are deployed, but South Africa contributes $13.5 million. Depending on the exchange rate, that is an additional 220 million rand, which was not funded by National Treasury. So we also have to find that money from, we actually funded that money from Op Mistral. When the UN reimbursed us our funds for Op Mistral, we had to utilize some of that money to fund the SAMIM deployment, the deployment to Mozambique, the challenges that we currently have in Mozambique. So that figure is not showing here because it was not part of the deployment. It was additional funds that the Department of Defense had to reprioritize and come up with 220 million. But currently for Op Vikela, for the 2022-2023 financial year, we received 556 million and we have expensed 344 million. But obviously, Op Vikela is still currently going on. So between the month of January, February, and March, by the end of the financial year, we'll give you a true picture of what we've actually expensed. And these are the details of Op Vikela with related to the allowances. So a bulk of it you will see deals with deprivation allowances and danger allowances. The next slide, which I think is our last slide on deployments, deals with Op Chariot. So Op Chariot deals with the KZN floods, our assistance to assist the KZN government during the floods that they went through in the current year, 2022-2023. We received 186 million. We've currently expensed 135 million. And the details will be on the next slide. However, for Op Chariot, with the current floods that are based on the rains we've had in the month of January and February, we've also been deployed to Eastern Cape, Mpumalanga, and KZN. And our current costing is approximately about 102 million, which we don't have funds for yet. So this deployment only started about last week. No, I'm under correction, but CG also correct me. So that money we haven't received yet. So we have to obviously find a way of funding that throughout our entire Op Chariot project. And the difference between 186 and 135 of approximately 50 million is what we may have to utilize to fund the current deployments that we are undertaking in Eastern Cape, Mpumalanga, and KZN. The details thereof relate to the deprivation allowance of our soldiers that are out there. And a bulk of them will be divers who need to go out there to find people that may have drowned. Apologies for that. Our last slide before the conclusion. Okay, my apologies, I just need to cough. The commissioning of deployment without financial resources has led to these operations being funded by means of reprioritization within the audit commitments, which is what I said in the presentation. We also had to reprioritize funds for Op Corona and Op Chariot to fund those operations that we are not fully funded for. And the risk thereof is it affects our ad hoc operations negatively. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Your conclusion doesn't necessarily follow on what you have just presented. I thought the picture you're presenting was that, you know, you were not, Treasury was not changing you. Yes, where that happened, you were able to, you know, move funds from one operation or from the savings of one operation to another operation, and in the end you break even, except in one case. I thought you were trying to dispel the myth that you know, for the reason why we called for this information, you'll recall, is that there's been this you know, outcry that you were not getting adequate funding for all these operations. Yes, they are not to the T as the DM has said it, but in most cases you break even, and where you have not broken even, you were able to borrow from the savings of one operation to another to stay afloat. You know, but if I look at your summary, you seem to paint a picture that says, man, look, you know, we have had to reprioritize programs in order to support the commitments. Unless if you say you have to, you know, reprioritize programs within the deployments themselves, or what you call the deployments themselves, or operations, to support, you know, underfunding in other operations. What are you trying to say? Just give us the summary that puts us puts us at ease. CFO.
Chair, I note your question, and the key is the timing of our funding from Treasury. So in most instances, we basically robbing Peter to pay Paul, because we are tasked in the middle of the year or at the beginning of the year for specific operations. And then the funding will only come during the adjustment budget towards the end of the year, which is around November, December. So by then we had to take money from other operations to fund new operations. And when we receive the money just before the end of the year, then we have to move those funds from where we were reimbursed to augment where we took the money from initially. So the challenge or the risk will not be that we will not be able to pay the allowances of the soldiers we deploy, but replacing and replenishing our stock levels and our equipment to support the operations fully is what suffers. And the advantage we have, which is a disadvantage to the department, is an advantage from a cash flow point of view, but it's an advantage from actually losing the funds, is the long delays in acquisition of or the procurement processes in acquiring ammunitions and acquiring equipment for our deployments, because the industry struggles to procure goods on our behalf. So that becomes a challenge where we end up delaying our procurement related expenses. So that money, we end up utilizing it to support the other operations that may not be funded on time.
It becomes a cash management, a cash flow management issue.
Unfortunately, that's why our figures, when you look at the figures that we presented, the appropriated amount will almost be similar to what we've expensed, because we take away money from other projects, and when it's reimbursed, we put that money back to where we took it from to balance it out.
Now you've actually put me at ease. I would recognize the members. I note the hand of Mr. Mare. Mr. Mare, before I take you, there is CJ Ops. Can I ask CJ Ops? I think he needs to say one or two things. CJ Ops.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening to all the members and the Deputy Minister. I'm just coming in on your particular question, that the conclusion when acting CFO was narrating it, it seems like there's no being shortchanged. Yes, it's how it ends up, but the CFO will not know what happens at tactical level. For instance, will be an Operation Corona, these funds allocated, and then there in Limpopo or Mpumalanga, they have to go and service a vehicle or buy tires. When it comes to the headquarters, we'll say there is no man. We will then do not satisfy what is required at that particular time. And like you said, the cash flow management, the OC at level 4, when you say there's no money, they'll have to bite the bullet and until, but it is actually detrimental. If we had to satisfy that, then the shortage of the fund or inadequacy will then be reflected. We manage it by saying, no, you cannot buy this one, you cannot do this one. The song is, let's wait for the new financial year. I'm just trying to clarify that part, Chair. Thank you.
No, that's fine, but that's more internal to the department than being a matter between Treasury and the department. There's only one time that you can get reimbursed is through adjustment, which happens once a year, but there are years where it happens twice. Like this year, there's going to be a second adjustment. Other than that, the problem would be internal than being interdepartmental. Our concern was when we were saying, man, look, there's a problem of being shortchanged. I thought that was coming from Treasury. Right, I've noted the following hands. Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Mare, Mr. Thabo Mutle, Mr. Reda, Mr. Motsomai, in that order. Mr. Mare.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much to Department and to CJ Ops for their input and presentations. I think that slide 31 is actually giving us a very good picture of the realities. What we have seen and how I have experienced and perceived the presentations of the different projects is obviously because it must be funded somehow. And we know that in the past we have always said it must be funded from own sources. So clearly, if it's funded from own sources, this project will have adequate, and the projects will have adequate revenue to obviously pay the to offset the expenditure. My problem is that change inside the department, and the CFO has used the words steal from Peter to pay Paul, and we know that that is what has restricted and has limited the department and the SANDF to prepare properly in terms of equipment especially, and of training and of preparing our soldiers to be deployed. If you must reprioritize anything, it is a challenge. We also know that the medium-term adjustment budget that we have received every year, predominantly, there's deviations here and there, is predominantly the amount of money that gets refunded or reimbursed by the UN for our Operation Mistral involvement and deployment. My first question is with regards to both Mistral and Vakela. The one question that we have posed in the past that was not answered tonight is, how much money does the United Nations refund or reimburse South Africa versus our costs, not versus what we have to fund from inside or internal. It is our expenses versus what the United Nations is refunding us, because that difference, the taxpayer for South Africa must actually foot the bill, which is unfair because it's not our mission, it's not our operation. The same with Vakela. And I also want to know in terms of how much money has SADC and SAMAM has refunded or reimbursed us. Right in the beginning, we were assured by the minister that this is a SADC operation, it's a SADC deployment, and SADC will foot the bill, not South Africa. And given that this is still classified as ad hoc, it becomes an enormous expense. And we know that we are struggling with our equipment, our helicopters and other equipment because of budgetary shortages. And it's because of expenses like this that we must manage the cash flow, that we are falling behind on others. So that is important for me. And that is what slide 31 is basically telling us, that, listen, we are compromising on other things to make sure that we get these funded. So my first question is then on SAMAM and Vakela, how much do we get feedback? Then I just want to know, in terms of the allowances that our soldiers are getting, both in Mozambique and in the DRC. I have heard at one stage that SADC gets refunded about $18,000 per month per soldier being deployed. It doesn't seem like our soldiers are getting $18,000 per month in terms of their deployment in Mozambique and the DRC. Is that what we are getting back to South Africa, to the National Treasury? Or how does that compare? Because I have picked up that our soldiers are unhappy because it's seemingly they are getting a different and much smaller allowance than other soldiers from, for instance, from Malawi and from Botswana. So, and also remember, my concern with regards to Mistral has always been, I know that, and we know that the dominant part of the refund or the reimbursement is based on the effectiveness of the helicopter squadrons. And Chairperson, you will recall what the Chief of the South African Air Force has told us when we visited Bloemspruit, that in terms of our limited resources and the limited number of helicopters available in South Africa, we've heard that last week from Armscor as well, he is in favor of us withdrawing the helicopters from the DRC, which in principle I can't fault him on, because it makes sense operationally and financially. However, if that is the case, that will happen, and if the helicopters, like in 2019 and 2020, were responsible for 80% of our reimbursements from the UN, then that means that we will be in a total different position, and that we can hardly afford that and expect from the taxpayers to pay that. So that is those information we need, because then we can decide whether South Africa as a country can actually sustainably afford to be in Mozambique and in DRC. But I think we are more responsible and for our own area, and which includes Mozambique. Then I also want to know, from all the goods and services that has been given to us on all the operations, I know that the one to Wuhan has been said that includes the charter of the South African Air Force SAA aircraft. What is the situation with regards to the other, especially Vakela and Mistral? We know that we have to, because of the situation with our C-130s, we have to charter other cargo aircraft to do that logistical support functions. To what extent are those charters included in that cost. I mean, we know that only this last month or so, there was about 70 odd, I think, flights with the chartered cargo aircraft. Then I also want to know, to what extent will and has neighbors like Malawi, like Botswana, like Zimbabwe, reimbursed us for the services that we have provided? And to what extent has other departments where we are deployed in support of those departments, like SAPS, like ESCOM, like Department of Water Affairs, have they refunded or reimbursed us? Because we know it is not a fair situation to expect from the Department of Defense and the SANDF to foot that expenses out of own pocket. And I get the impression that those departments are bad payers in that regard as well. Chairperson, then I also just want to say that money that we contribute to the SADC Standby Force, which is 220 million rand a year, is significant if you compare that with our own expenses and how that will push that up. Then I also want to know the allowances that we pay for our soldiers on foreign soil. SAMIM and Mistral, SAMIM, Yabikela, and Mistral or MONUSCO, are those allowances the same per person per day, or does that differ? And if so, why does that differ? I have seen in your Mistral presentation that there was a significant reduction in cost from 2019 to 2020. Why was that? Because, you know, I mean, we are there for quite some time, but suddenly that shows to me that we have suddenly spent significantly less money. And I don't know whether that was actually, you know, as a result of now in the situation that we've got with the lower reimbursements and you know, kind of what was the reason for that, and how does that affect us going forward? Chairperson, I think for the moment that is my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mutle.
No, thanks, Chair. I'm in the dark, just experienced load shedding, therefore the video is on. I don't think I'll be visible.
Yeah, you may switch the video off so that you keep your line stable.
Mr. Honorable Mutle must just smile so that we can see him, and he must open his eyes so that we can see him and identify him.
No, I was just going to smile, but you used an infrared to take some of my question.
Oh, sorry.
No, thanks, Chair, and good evening to members on the platform. Yeah, I think mine is on the reimbursement, but probably it's a different angle from the one that the questions that were raised. The UN reimbursement currently, as it stands, is the department happy with the lead time, because you get it very later in the year after you have conducted the deployment, and in most cases, I want to believe that you then rob Peter to pay Paul, as you will be waiting for those reimbursement. That the time, the lead time for you to get back that money, taking into consideration the that we find ourselves in, does it make sense, or do we have have you made strides or engagement if it does not make sense, so that there's at least a balance in terms of the lead time for you to get those reinvestment, as much as it goes to treasury and how it comes to back to the defense force. Secondly, with other deployments like your Corona, Fikela, so forth and so on, when the deployments are made, we get a letter that indicates that these deployments are made and this is how much will be spent on those deployments. I just want to find out whether those are estimates or those are projection figures. How realistic are they? Because seemingly you suggest that I've heard that the deputy minister that those spending are not up to the teeth. Is it because in most cases you get a surplus, or you've got a deficit, or by the time you get those resources, as you'll be using what is available, those resources will be less than what you would have incurred as expenditure for those particular deployment. I mean, lastly, Chair, yesterday we have had an explanation given by the Minister of Finance in terms of the emergency resources made available, as opposed to slightly different from what Honorable Mare has raised in terms of supporting the police, supporting ESCOM. To what an extent can we probably make use of those emergency funds to assist also in supporting and funding the deployment for those purposes, those emergency funds, or the manner in which these deployments are done with those resources? Is the Defence Force happy with how it has been done and the manner in which those deployments are funded? But I don't think CJ Ops, you can say you are happy with how they are. But what are the other avenues that we think we can explore into this emergency funding for you to be able to conduct your deployment without taking from Paul to fund, from Peter to fund Paul, so that at least these monies are readily available for you to conduct those deployments. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rader.
Yeah, good evening, Chairperson, and thank you for the opportunity. Good evening to the colleagues and representatives from the department and from the military. Thanks, Chair. I think I've been partly covered. You know, the operation in the DRC Op Mistral is in its 22nd year now, and I do know that we've been trying to get to the bottom of the finances behind it and the inflows versus the outflows for quite some time. And I do think, you know, especially the tragic death of Flight Sergeant Vusi Mabena should focus our minds on the state of readiness that we have in the DRC. And yeah, I think we should be seized with this and make sure that, I mean, that's the mandate of the Joint Standing Committee on Defense, is that the deployment budget, how the budget's applied and so on, is exactly what we're supposed to be looking at. And while we don't understand the ins and outs properly, I think we are at a distinct disadvantage. 22 years is a long time to be involved in such an operation. Chair, I do know what a deprivation allowance is. You know, having danger pay is well understood. I don't know what a deprivation allowance is, if we can get an understanding of that. Then I also want to just take, so the Finance Minister's speech from this week, from yesterday, actually makes very clear comment on page 18 under disaster response. It says, and I'm quoting now, "The contingency reserve will also be used to fund emergency responses, including as undertaken by the Defence Force," end quote. So it looks like there is an acknowledgement from Treasury that these things need to be funded. And perhaps historically this hasn't been the case and it hasn't been done properly. But with a concession like this, I think it's important for us to say that really the internal arrangements in terms of cash flow and when the money arrives and so on is really an administrative matter, not much to do with the Joint Standing Committee on Defence. And from the sounds of things, it's something that needs to be hammered out with Treasury directly, you know, and perhaps with the assistance of whoever's providing the banking services to the department. Yeah, I also want to question, you know, when Vikela started in Mozambique. It was initially a 3-month operation, extended to 6 months, and again we're still there. And I think that's now just coming up for 2 years, a little over 2 years we've been there. And I think the question is well asked: Are we getting reimbursed for that? Is the reimbursement adequate? And perhaps it's not a question for now, but I do know that we are at a closed session. When are we planning on leaving? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Motsomai.
Thank you, Chairperson. Honorable Mutlu, you must come to Cape Town where there's light and there's no load shedding. You mustn't hide yourself in Makai. I just want to know about, you see, we are having soldiers and who are not being paid, who are earning this so little that they cannot do their job. It's like when you are hiring police officers, you want the police officers to do a perfect job, then you pay them peanuts. They cannot do, they will push corruption on the other side. But if they are doing their own, they are getting enough payment, they will do the job. Now, I want to know about the privatization allowance, what you were saying about that. Another thing I want to know, because it looked like General Sangwin want to explain about the rounds, that they don't have rounds for the reservists. I ask myself, are the reservists are volunteers or they are paid to look on what they are doing? Because if you pay the reservists and they will do exactly a job that you want them to do it. And I would like to ask you, Chairperson, especially you, Chair, General Kaba, let's make by all means that our people are being paid enough money so that they can do a job for us. We have South Africa Army. I'm happy to see both General Sangwin, not because of their uniform, but the mentality, their ideas and ideologies. They want to invest it to the youth. Can these people be paid so that our soldiers are reservists, they can do a proper engineering work for us, South African? I thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. I think that concludes the comments on the part of the committee. I just need to round up some of the comments the colleagues made. Just to refocus the presentation. The contingency reserves, I think the Deputy Minister said we don't have that. If they had it, if the department had an allocation like that specifically given to them to attend to these ad hoc deployments, when they happen, it will be better because they're now becoming a regularity. Perhaps it's a note we need to make for our discussion with Treasury to consider making an allocation like that, which would of course not be spent for other things or on other things, but is a contingency to help the department with cash flow to because that they spend money and only to be reimbursed later, it paralyzes other operations within the department because it's money that they take from other operations to fund the agent taskings, whose funding will come much later. It's okay when you have a surplus money in the department, you can easily move funds around. But when every single cent is committed and then you get this agent tasking, it means that some of the things you had planned to do will suffer in the process. Velem, I think we need to pick this up and for our discussion with Treasury at some point. I'm sure they can look at that because we can't say these ad hoc, what you call deployments, once off or isolated. They're now becoming a regular feature. As I think the acting CFO mentioned that for the last 3 years, we have had 13 deployments, 4 ordered. At least those ordered, there's certainty. You can budget easy for them, and none ad hoc, which when they come, they impact the cash flow management in the department. So I think that we must flag that for a discussion. And then the second point that has not come up in the presentation, I think we'll have another day for it. It's the number of the reserve force to the number of the regular force members. Number of the regular force members to the number of regular force members. What is the ratio there for each deployment? I'm raising this point because this starts to speak to the target that you posed in relation to the reduction or trying to manage the compensation of employees. You say you want to reduce the reserve force man hours from 2.1, I think 2.4 at some point, to 2.1 to 1.9, but that target is elusive. We've never met it, because just when you thought you would, just after you've posted the target to get these deployments, and these deployments now mean that you must then increase the man hours from what was essentially your target to whatever number that you actually end up with. And that too starts to disrupt your management of what you call compensation of employees. So I think let's also get information on the ratio of regular force members to reserve force members, or the other way around, so that we get a sense of where it is. I know that when you deploy, it's cheaper to deploy a regular force because you pay a wage and 1 or 2 allowances, 1 or 2 or 3 allowances, as opposed to when you deploy a regular. But the regular is already salaried. I think it's cheaper in that sense because it's there already on some cost, COE cost are already part of the budget. So it's that balance that we want to see. But that is the issue for another day. And then my last point, colleagues, it's yes, I think Mr. Murray covered it in his input. What is not coming out clear in your presentation is we can see the appropriated amount versus expenditure, but we need to zoom in into the reimbursements that we get from the UN, particularly for Operation Mistral, and reimbursement from other departments. I mean, we provide service to some of the departments and we spend money, and that if we don't get money back, or we don't get reimbursed by those departments, that on its own, has an impact on the budget. So that's those two we need to get a handling on. I know that in your presentation you just put appropriated. I think that appropriation includes the Mistral, but the question is what we get from the UN, does what we get from the UN cover all the cost of our participation outside, or in terms of the agreement with them? So, but that would be a discussion for another time. I don't think we'll have time to zoom into that now, but in response, we may just do a high level comment and then pack it for another time. All right, colleagues, I think that has actually covered most of the things. And then maybe the last point, CJ Op, that one is for you, and maybe let me say, Deputy Minister, it's to start to discuss now, our participation, for example, in the Operation Mistral. We've been there for, when we came in, the SNTF was already in the DRC, for example, but we've not sat down to just look into the nuances of why we got there in the first place, and what do you see as your prognosis currently? How long are we likely to be there? Is it a few months or a year or 2 or 3, judging by what you see on the ground? And when are we likely to exit? What conditions you have deemed necessary, minimum conditions you have deemed necessary for us to start to scale down with the objective of exiting at some point. I'm not getting into the issue as Mr. Murray has put it, but I'm saying we need to have that conversation now with the department. Of course, it's got to be a closed meeting, because and whether we are adequately supporting all our operations wherever we are deployed abroad. So that's for a closed meeting. I think CJ Ops must take a note of it. Colleagues, I think I'm done. Let me now hand over. DM, do you want to come in now or maybe after they've done the presentation? They've commented.
Honorable Chair, let me come in after they have shared additional information.
Okay, thank you so much, DM.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, SecDef and the team.
Thank you, Chair, once more. I will request Mr. Abotsi to attend to the question on how much does the UN reimburses us against the cost incurred, and as well as how much are we getting from SADC against the cost we are incurring. Then I think the Chief Joint Operations can assist with the charter flights in the absence of a strategic airlift, and the reimbursement, Mr. Abotsi, again against other countries, if there is any reimbursement we get from assisting countries like Zimbabwe, Malawi, and even other government departments. So Mr. Abotsi will take all those that have to do with finances. Mr. Abotsi.
Thank you, SecDef. Thank you, Chair and members of the Joint Standing Committee on Defense. Maybe let's start off with the question that deals with the UN reimbursement. It was raised by Honorable Murray and Honorable Motley. We do get reimbursed. The problem is we get reimbursed a year later, a year after actually incurring the cost. Last year, we received 760 million from the UN with regard to our deployment to Mistral, our deployment to the DRC. Now, when it comes to the MOUs, which deals with the personnel cost, we actually receive funding or we receive reimbursements on a quarterly basis. The challenge comes with the LOAs, which is the letters of assist with regard to the helicopters. But we do receive this money and we put it back to the environment that incurred the cost. So for instance, the LOAs from the from the Oryx and the Rayfox, last year we received 333 million. That money goes back into the Air Force to repair and to maintain their platforms. And then there was the MOU, we received 358 million. That also goes back into the Joint Ops environment to replenish.
Sorry, it doesn't go via National Treasury. It goes directly to the department. Is that what you're saying?
No, Chair. It goes to National Treasury, and the National Treasury reimburses us through the adjustment budget. So we have a standard agreement with National Treasury. We wrote to them for them to reimburse us, and they responded that we have a standing agreement with them. So when the money comes from the UN, it goes into an account called the B7 account, which is the National Treasury, and then through the adjustment budget process around October, November, they give us back the money. But that is always a year later, but we get reimbursed based on that. Then there was a question about how much do we really lose out of that? And there are losses. It's difficult to determine now the actual cost versus what we actually get reimbursed, but there are penalties that are charged or that are levied against the department, against our claims. And that's due to our equipments that are not always in the required state based on the agreements that we have with the UN. So there are penalties that we do incur from that. And we do send a team on a yearly basis or every 2 years to the UN to reconcile the invoices between the DRC and the UN and our officers here. And that exercise normally does really assist a lot, because normally when we come back from that reimbursement exercise with the UN in New York, a bulk of the money we do get reimbursed. The challenge is the UN can only reimburse you when the contributing states do contribute. So the money is not always available with the UN, but when they do receive, when all the contributing states do contribute to the UN, then we do get our reimbursements. But unfortunately, as I indicated, it's always a year later. There was also a question around reimbursements from other agencies or other departments. We actually do have a reimbursement policy. And in the past, we did work for Department of Health in Northwest and a few other entities and agencies. And the Army did some work for some other entities and provinces in terms of building of bridges and so on and so forth. We do build those entities, but they don't always pay us back in time. But that money, there is a policy in terms of how do we recover. There's a costing that it's shared with those departments that we do work on behalf of. And those costs that they may still owe us lies within our debtors account, and we're chasing after that money that they do owe us. Then there was a question from Honorable Mare about the allowances for Vikela and Mistral, the foreign allowances that we do pay. They are exactly the same allowances that we do pay, whether you're in Vikela or you're in Mistral. And then there was a question on the reduction of expense and allocation in Mistral. That was during the 2020-2021 financial year. That was the COVID period. So there was less activities within that environment, hence the reduction of approximately 800 million to 600 million for that specific financial year. It was during the COVID period of 2020-2021. And unfortunately, also we had to utilize some of that money to assist with the whole COVID process. Let's see what I'm missing. Then, oh, there was also a question on emergency funding. As the DM indicated, and Chair, as you also highlighted too, we do not have an emergency fund. National Treasury does have an emergency funding for unforeseen and unavoidable expenses. So when there is unforeseen and unavoidable expenses or operations, then we write to them for them to reimburse us. Last year, we requested for funding out of that based on Vikela, but they could not assist us. Hence, we had to approach Department of Social Development for them. So the 755 million that we received for Vikela last year was due to our interventions where we had to approach Department of Social Development because they had additional funding left, and they were able to assist us with the 755 million, and that was through the interventions of National Treasury because they couldn't fund us out of our emergency funding. And I think as a department, we also agree that National Treasury should seriously look into this emergency funding for our ad hoc operations, where they can actually keep the money and ring fence it at National Treasury, and then when we do get taskings, they can actually just allocate the money for us out of that. Then we don't have to wait a whole year for the money or utilize other funding to fund these ad hoc operations. Then there was a question on deprivation allowance, what these deprivation allowances are. I'll try to attempt to respond to it, and if I don't respond properly, CJ Ops will be able to assist me. But these are allowances that we pay to our soldiers for being away from home, because these soldiers, when they are deployed, they stay away from home for a longer period of time. Now, whether you live with your family or you live alone, you obviously you have commitments at home that you needed to, or that you're obligated to manage. And when we deploy you away from home for 3 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, those are deprivation allowances. So it's called deprivation. You are deprived from your the comfort of your home or the comfort of you living as a normal human being, because as a soldier, you are deployed out there, you are deprived from all these other benefits you may have as a normal human being that lives on a day-to-day basis with a family. So that's what that deprivation allowances are. Chair, I think I've dealt with all the finance-related questions. CJ Ops can deal with the other questions. Should I have missed any, I will come back to respond to any of the finance-related questions. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Writer, for the time you spent in Cape Town, you can go to the Secretary or to the Legislature for your deprivation allowance. CJ Op, is there anything to add?
Thank you, Chair. Maybe allow me to start from Honorable Mutsamai, his submission that soldiers need to be paid adequately, but particularly speaking about the reserve force members. Well, in operations, I would say the reserve force members do get an advantage or appropriate payment, because when in operations, the same regular force member and reserve force member get the same allowances and the same wages. When they are deployed under force employment, then even the wages they get paid under force employment budget. Then the issue of how much we spend in MONUSCO, Chair, you indicated that for another day, when Mr. Murray had asked comparison of expenditure in SADC and MONUSCO for another day.
CJ Office, because it will require information that I don't think you readily have at the moment. I'm sure Mr. Murray has no problem with that.
Yes.
Sure.
It seems our soldiers are paid less in Vikela, Honorable Murray. It's a yes or no. It will also cover the issue of allowances. In standard allowances, a soldier deployed gets a standard danger allowance, then the standby allowance, and then deprivation allowance. That is inside the country. When it's outside the country, there's a fourth one, which is international obligation. Now, when it comes to the three, which are RSA, purely RSA, everyone in all operations, they get the same allowances. But when it is international obligation, the collar, as you know from National Treasury or I think the PSA, which indicate per country, when you're going to a country, these are the tariffs. So the tariffs of Mozambique are obviously less than the DRC as published. When the collar changes, then we also adjust. So the difference, we are aware, yes, you're right. In the beginning, the soldiers did ask those questions. Those who were new in operations, that different countries will get different, the collar part. But the rest, they are the same, those which are SNDF. Mr. Murray also asked what might have made the expenditure of Mistral 2019 to 2021 lesser. It was COVID. With the expenditure in Mistral is also the movement to the mission area for sustainment, for ops visit, and for command and control, and various aspects. And then there were very little. And secondly, this I'm assuming ammunition. When we procure acquire ammunition to the mission areas, particularly for Mistral, it dependent on usage. Some other years, then we won't purchase or acquire ammunition, then expenditure will be less. In another year, we'll procure ammunition big amounts, and then expenditure will be more. That is the effect, or which makes that difference at certain stages. Honorable Mutli asked if the costs indicated in the employment papers are realistic and estimates, having gone through the presentation where the Deputy Minister indicated that the issue of it doesn't indicate, seems to be a little bit odd. The employment papers, when we do the planning, we plan for the worst case scenario. We plan that this situation might, now is the way it might require the following forces and elements. And you go to what if it is at the extreme, then we plan for it. The purpose for that, and then it does happen regularly that we do not spend all of it now in operations. And then at the CFO's office and because they are able to manage. If we allocated all of it, then so what thereafter. But you have to plan for the 3 months operation such that it cannot happen that we have to go back to the president to seek authority. So that is the rationale. And or if the situation escalates. With the riots, the situation escalated beyond what we had planned. With Chariot in KZN and Eastern, it migrated more than. So those are it is estimates data there, and it says so, estimated cost, estimated numbers. The newly introduced, mentioned by the Minister of Finance, emergency funding, I am of the opinion that the department will still sit down and see how do we benefit from that one. I am of the opinion that the members here of Parliament of the committee have had the Chief National Defence Force indicating that the frustrations with funding, he had said he is willing to say National Treasury, they can keep the money of operations and activate it when we have to. And I think the emergency as well, it is maybe in the same fashion that if then there is now the floods, then we do our preparation and the National Treasury activate that emergency funding. That's how I foresee it, and we still have to, through the sector, how it will be managed. The deprivation, Mr. Mabobot addressed it 100%. The actual main one is that the soldier there is active 24 hours. 24 hours, full month, full year. So that is the deprivation, compensation to that deprivation. He cannot go home, and even if he was in the base, in the camp, he is active, he or she is active. Yeah, I think I've covered the rest is those that you have indicated that we must prepare for the next session sometime.
No, I think you've done very well. Colleagues, I can still see hands. I will only just allow 1 or 2 comments, not too long comments, so that we wind up this discussion. Thabo, you still want to say something? Mr. Mutle?
Oh, no, I'm fine, Chair. It's a legacy hand, I'm sorry.
Yes, Mr. Murray, just 1 or 2, not too long.
Yes, Chairperson, just the one that was that the CFO has not addressed, and that is the reimbursements from SADC, what we have paid them versus what we have received back. I accept that, you know, what CJ Ops has said, that we get a detail yearly of the last 3-4 years, similar to all these comparisons of what we have received from both the UN and from SAMM as well, so that we can make those comparisons. Then, Chair, I want to ask, based on the responses, if we can get information with regards to how much does other departments owe the Department of Defense, so that we can know who's the culprits, and then where we interact with them, that we can also, you know, take that up, because eventually we are responsible for that. And
have I lost Mr. Murray, colleagues, or the problem is on my side only?
Oh, it looked like he got cut off.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
And then disappeared. All right.
Yeah.
Colleagues, he has disappeared. Okay, but I've noted the point that when you come back to give us you know, detail.
The last that I want to ask you, maybe the last that I want to ask you is whether, yeah, the last issue that I just wanted to raise. I know that there are practices in other countries where there are operations or deployments that Parliament then consider at that stage, when it is necessary, the approval for the additional appropriations. Now, I know their system might work different from ours, but I just want to ask whether our people like Dr. Janse van Rensburg can maybe do some research into what other practices are there, and maybe how we can maybe interact and consider other practices that we can suggest to National Treasury to also deal with this cash flow and the long delays of that refunding and reimbursements. That's just a question. So if they can do that, that'll be much.
Yes. Okay. Now, I think you are right. If you could just conduct that research for us. I know the US, they do it. They put out a special appropriation to cater for the deployment of their soldiers. But in their case, they deal with big amounts. You know, but you are right. Let's look at that, whether we can ameliorate the cash flow management problem by using contingency reserves that get built within the department, or we can go via a special appropriation, but only if the PFMA allows that. But of course, those two options, if we have them well researched, they will assist us in the conversation with Treasury. No, I take note of that. And I was trying to say that when you come back on the detailed, on the cost versus what we get back in Operation Mistral, Operation Vigela, please also include, you know, the cost and the recovery thereof from the departments that we render services there to. If you could look at that as well. I'm sure the team will take note of that, and when we write back to you, we indicate all these areas that we want you to cover. When we meet, we'll indicate the day when we would want you to come back to us on. And I think we've covered everything. I'm happy with the manner we have handled the discussion. I think the intervention that we made this morning, I think it helped to, you know, unpack the information to give us the level of detail so as to, you know, refocus, recalibrate the discussion. AXCA, AGA, Auditor General's Office, is represented by Floyd, is in the meeting. It's just indicated that some of his senior people are not in the meeting owing to other commitments. And lastly, on the ESCOM issue, we are yet to approve the letter, to consider the letter of employment just immediately after this. Maybe it's a discussion, maybe for another day, because we note that the money is not readily, Treasury says it doesn't have money. We must talk to ESCOM because we're there to support ESCOM. But we'll have to look at it closely at some other point. DM, I thought I should just raise these issues so that at least on my side, I wind up the discussion and then hand over to you to give us a closing comment on all these discussions. Over to you, DM.
Honorable Chair, Member of Parliament, Mr. Kaba, committee members, I must thank the committee for the deliberations we have had this evening, and also thank the officials of the department for the information shared with the oversight of Parliament. as exercised by the Joint Standing Committee on Defense. I must thank them most heartily, because I think they have shared information that gives the members of the committee a very clear picture of what is happening with our defense establishment, which is the responsibility of no other committee but this one, the Joint Standing Committee on Defense. Where our country stands at any given moment is the function of the decisions, sentiments, preferences of the Joint Standing Committee on Defense. I want to, Honorable Chair, just in relation to that, start with the one area of focus which has been commented upon, which I think is important, which is the practice of funding ad hoc deployments through reimbursements, if I may use that word. Indeed, it does have challenges, and Honorable Member Mutle has said, if that is what we are saying, what better practice are we proposing to be, considered by Treasury in order to deal with these emergencies that the Defense Force is on an ongoing basis used for? From another angle, honorable members, there are two things which it's two sides of the same coin. I want to believe that when the Defense Force is employed for an emergency and it is using its own budget, they are likely to take a minimalistic intervention to responding to the problem, because it is not within their finances, but also they will naturally be anxious as to whether the negotiations of the reimbursement will be successful if Treasury, for one reason or one view or the other, feels that they were extravagant in the spending incurred to realize the assignment they were given. So reimbursement, say use what you have, they will reimburse you. It means those who are acting can never fully apply their capabilities of their capacities because they don't know how much leeway are they actually being given by those who are holding the purse. But the converse of that also is that the extent to which we could be able to act as the Defense Force if we knew how much was available, how much was at our disposal, could actually be a completely different ballgame from acting out of the, or rather in the dark in terms of what you have to deal with the problem at hand properly. So what the point I'm making is that it means that yes, the Defense Force is there, yes, it is responding to all these emergencies, but is it adequately responding to the emergencies? It is adequate because we don't know how much more we could do if we knew that we have the resources for these contingencies. But as the Honorable Mutle was suggesting, it's a matter we've got to look into, and maybe the Joint Standing Committee on Defense should, share its views with those responsible for the finances. The other point which I also wanted to immediately agree to is what you suggested, Honorable Chair, which is that we need an assessment of Ops Mistra. We need to assess the operational dynamics in the DRC now and the implications for our deployed force in the DRC in Ops Mistra. But also we need to evaluate the strategic intent that informed the decision to go into the DRC. It needs to be evaluated in the context of where we are and what is happening. And that is a task in which the ministry will accept readily to undertake if this is what the Joint Standing Committee Chair through you is asking us to look into. The question about the reserves, the utilization of the reserves vis-a-vis the permanent force, what are the ratios? That information, I think the Chief of Joint Ops can bring the details of it to the Joint Standing Committee, because indeed the utilization of reserves is a concept which was intended to avoid high force levels and therefore a huge budget that the country spends on the military. The reserves are there to provide us the surge capacity to provide the levels of engagement of our troops, which only through the reserves we can do. My understanding has always been this, that the reserves from a human resource remuneration point of view are providing the department with an opportunity to make a meaningful savings than the remuneration and the benefits and other assistive interventions that the department has to provide to those who are permanently or who are in the regular force, who are permanently employed. We need to have, because I remember the last chief of the General Anderson during Ops Notlela was excited to point out how the reserves have come in handy to make it possible for the Defense Force to deploy the numbers of troops that we had on the ground vis-a-vis what the permanent force was allowing us to do. But those details can be shared. Honorable Murray is making a point that information should be provided over what I view as an operational matter. The spending of the South African Defence Force on chartering. That information is operational information, but should be made available. I would advise that it can be drawn from the department, even through a question to the minister in Parliament, that the information can be provided. Last point is this, that I wanted to say, which is that the deployment of our defense force will always be a political intervention in the broader scheme of the interests of the country. So our deployment in Ops Vikela, yes, that problem is not on South African soil. It's not on South African soil. our deployment in the DRC, that's not on South African soil. But there is a clear understanding that those deployments furthers the political interests of South Africa. They further the well-being of South Africa. And of course, we can go into the details of what the implications would be for us if Cabo Delgado was to completely overwhelm our neighbor and go out of hand. It is with those kind of possibilities that you see the value of having this deployment undertaken from time to time, because there is always a bigger picture. The military will always be part of political decisions or political interests that any one country at a given time feels that those interests are actually directly affecting the well-being of its own citizens. This is the context in which these deployments are taking place, and we can discuss this more extensively by getting all of the aspects interrogated about the benefit of the deployment of our troops in the region the way we have used them. Chair, with that said, I must once again thank the members of the committee for their reflections this evening on the ordered commitments of the Defense Force and the ad hoc utilization or deployments taskings that have happened over the last 4 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, DM. Those were the closing remarks. Let me thank the team that did the presentation this evening. You did an excellent job. Even the manner you responded to the question was satisfactory. Can we then quickly move to the next item? DM is the presentation of the employment
letters.
Letters for consideration by this committee. I don't know who to charge with that responsibility, DM.
Acting SecDef, should I invite you in?
Thank you.
Dr. Kamete, yes.
Thank you, DM. I think this is the presentation that we made. I don't know whether Joint Operation has a presentation on the employment papers.
CJ Op.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Deputy Minister. To the acting SecDef, in the committee will know that it is not a presentation, a formal PowerPoint presentation. It's just to state how the product that is now with the committee came about. I will very broadly present or inform the House that there was a requirement from the Commander-in-Chief of the National Defence Force to the Chief of the National Defence Force to, on an urgent basis, take action to address the situation which was prevailing specifically in Mpumalanga, where ESCOM power stations were being vandalized, and there was sabotage, as well as there was challenges with incorrect coals being delivered. That was in December. And the Chief National Defence Force then tasked the Chief of Joint Ops to deploy a force element to provide protection and security to those power stations on an urgent basis. And additionally, consider to cover all 9 provinces, plan to deploy in all 9 provinces. The rationale behind that was the intelligence that had been provided was that it is not only the power stations, but the substation where power or electricity is generated. It includes the substations that are in other areas, in other provinces, where now it was purely sabotage, and we're to protect those facilities, and additionally also cover the general infrastructure, critical infrastructure of government. Was the chief indicated that to be narrow and say only power stations when it is not 100% clear what is the motive behind this? Is it only about power or just general criminality in the country? And then we deployed those elements in all 9 provinces, and with each province having to have 1 subunit, except KZN and Mpumalanga and Gauteng at Battalion HQ and 3 companies. And Julie, with the planning, with speed, our first deployment in 2 days, or on day number 2, was in Mpumalanga, where we were able to respond quickly, and a presence was established, a footprint in those power stations, and we have the opinion that it did assist. And yes, the process of seeking or requesting authority from the president was duly undertaken, and with a period of deployment of up until the 16th December till the 16th of March, with all the provinces deployed. And this is how the presidential authority is premised from. I submit, Chair.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, this is the presentation, brief and straight to the point. Thank you very much, CJ Ops. Mr. Murray, is your hand up?
Thank you, Chair. My apologies, I'm going to leave my video off. I'm using my phone now. I hear what the CJ Ops say, and I don't blame him at all. In fact, I'm actually very proud of how he and the Defence Force has responded. Whether we agree with the instructions in the authorization of the President or not, that's not the question, but I think they have done well. The concern, again, that comes from earlier tonight is the funding. And obviously between ESCOM and SAPS, who is supposed to be responsible for domestic, order. It's actually an indictment against both of them, the fact that the Defence Force had to be deployed. So I hope that we will make a point of that we hold them accountable for the costs. Because, I mean, our guys, we have seen in the presentation that there's not one deployment and operation that we can actually embark on without at least a third of the support coming from the reserve force. So, and it's costing, you have quite rightly said, it's costing us a hell of a lot of money. And if those guys who is responsible and who are responsible cannot foot the bill, we must really make tough decisions. And I want to say that we obviously have to take note. I mean, the 3 months is nearly finished. It's only less than a month that is left. But it really, we must push those departments that they pay for this cost. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other comment, colleagues? I also support the deployment for the same reason that the CJ Ops has advanced, and is one operation that must really be assisted or must be intelligence driven in a serious way. You know, you can't believe the level of criminality that is going on everywhere, be it in railways, railway stations. I mean, just next door to me, a post office that was vandalized during the July unrest has now been, New Germany post office is one post office I use. It's been stripped from the window to the roof and so on. There's and besides that, some categories of crime are starting to become stubborn now, and that really we need to do something more than we have done as a country. I support you know, a position that says at some point we must release soldiers to the police, to work with the police, to really drive these levels of crime down. The proliferation of you know, arms, I don't know where they come from, whether it's through our porous borders or arise from the theft that took place in July. There's impunity generally, and people are being killed left and right. I think the statistics are there for everyone to see. The minister has just released them. Minister of Police has just released them the other day, and we can't hold the soldiers back. We can't hold the soldiers back. And I think we need to act drastically now. We need to augment the numbers of the police. Yes, they are attempting to increase the numbers. 10,000 was released the other day, and they're recruiting 5,000 and another 5,000, another 5,000 over the next MTF. But I still believe the numbers will still not be sufficient. I think General DM, I think at some point we've got to place this matter on the agenda. That is it not time that we start to actually release the SNDF to work in tandem with the police to drive the crime levels down. I thought I should just make this comment. It's out of my heart. It's provoked by what I see happening around, and we are we're abroad doing peace keeping, and I think we also need to do a bit of peacekeeping, inverted commas, in the country as well. DM, I'm sure I'm actually provoking you by saying what I've just said. You may want to do a comment. Thank you very much, CJ Op. DM, you close the discussion.
No, Honorable Chairperson and honorable members, once again, thank you very much for looking at the bigger picture of how our defense force is being employed, is being utilized in the interests of the country. The point, the sentiment you are heartily sharing now, Honorable Chair, it's well placed. I think as a public representative, what you are verbalizing is what everybody would want Parliament to hear. It's what citizens would want Parliament to hear. It's quite well placed, that concern. The security cluster of Cabinet has, its work cut out we need to improve the levels of stability of our country in order to give economic recovery and to make the country work. It is very critical that our dimension of the national challenges be addressed, with the, diligence that it deserves. So I agree with what the committee is saying through you, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, DM. Colleagues, we can't take any further than this. It remains for me to thank you, the Deputy Minister, SecDef, and the team from the Department of Defense for your presentation this evening. And you and all the colleagues who have come to listen to the presentation, and I know that you're listening and the feedback you give us, make us a better team and a responsive team, as it were. Thank you very much, colleagues. Colleagues, we only have 2 items, but they are committee items. Am I correct, Nandipa, before I discharge the colleagues?
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
Thank you very much. DM, so, and the team, thank you very much. You are free to leave.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right. Okay, can we then quickly move to the next item?
Chair, I think the next item on the list, I'll just share my screen.
Right.
Can you see the screen,
yes,
Chair?
I can see it clearly.
Okay. Chair, this is the consideration of the committee's own midterm strategic review. And this was discussed last year. If members recall, we discussed this last year. I think it was in November last year. This was discussed, and the report was presented. And there were a number of inputs from members. 2 members actually wrote with some input as well. And on the day of the discussion, the Deputy Minister actually also provided some really valuable input, even though this is a committee document. He gave an external viewpoint on this, which also resulted in members considering further aspects to add to the report. So this is an updated draft, and I included in yellow, as distributed to members, I included in yellow the update. So Chair, if it's fine, I'll go through I'll quickly scan through the document, but focus on the yellow parts that are the new parts to the updated document. So in terms of the draft report, just a reminder, this is not new, but just a reminder that this report is drafted in terms of Joint Rule 120D, which outlines that the Joint Standing Committee of Defence should conduct a strategic review of the SANDF midterm in the life of a particular parliament and submit recommendations to both houses on its transformation, integration, equity, morale, and defence readiness. Now, those categories there, transformation, integration, equity, morale, and defence readiness, those categories that's in the joint rule actually shaped the outline of the document. We therefore provided an overview of transformation with a backdrop of the 1996 White Paper on Defence, the 1998 Defence Review, the 2015 Defence Review, and further updates on personnel management, defence career management. The second, and apologies, the last part also includes aspects that we looked at in this parliament. Then also in line with the requirements from the rule, looked at secondly at integration, matters of integration with a background to integration, and then specifically referring to the termination of Integration Intake Act of 2001, which in essence nullifies this section of the report. However, there were some observations around transformation even in this parliament, and those were included. Equity, in terms of equity, we looked firstly at providing a background on equity policy directives, and then provided some comparative personnel statistics over the specific parliament. And those are included in the boxes here from 2018-19, 1920, 2021. As you can see, those are included. And then also comparison, how does this compare to May 1996, so where we were just after 1994, how does that compare to where we are now? So those statistics were included, and also this committee's oversight of equity aspects and the meetings that we've held in that regard, specifically in May 2021 and March 2022. The next aspect is around morale of the SANDF. We looked at observations by the Interim Defence Force Service Commission that were also presented to the previous committees, and then subsequent observations by the Defence Force Service Commission itself. Furthermore, defence readiness. Defence readiness is a bit of a longer section in this document because this committee of the 6th Parliament has specifically looked in several occasions at issues around defence readiness. So first of all, just an overview of the legislative directives around defence readiness. What did the 1998 Defence Review say about defence readiness? And what did the 2015 Defence Review say around defence readiness? And then specifically to the work of this committee, during the 6th Parliament, both defence committees actually have engaged on oversight of defence matters that impact directly on defence readiness. And the aspects that were included here is an apparent increased reliance on the SANDF, and specifically the minister's comments were incorporated into this. The following were included in relation to this discussion on the increased reliance on the SANDF. We included the following. It must be noted that internal deployments of the SANDF in support of the police and other government departments is aligned to the constitutional mandate of the force. The SANDF may also not be fully suited, trained, funded, and equipped for these internal deployments. Increased deployments of the SANDF under these conditions place significant strain on the force to maintain high levels of defence readiness. It also impacts negatively on training schedules as well as the DoD's budget. In addition, equipment and other hardware utilized in such deployments have a reduced lifespan and requires often costly repair and maintenance replacement. These concerns are aggravated given that in many instances, the levels of reimbursement that the DoD receives for deployments are not fully aligned to actual expenditure. So those in yellow, those were additional aspects we included based on the previous discussions. Then there's discussions on the impact of the decreasing defence budget. This is well known to members. The increasing misalignment of defence expenditure, and here we looked at the specifically at the increased personnel cost. And this was also taken, this graph, for example, from the 2015 Defence Review, which stated the problem. And then we referred to all the meetings or several of the meetings that both committees have had around the misalignment of the defence budget as a whole. Next, looking at the status of prime mission equipment, there's an addition here. For example, in the second paragraph, we looked at the 2019 Joint Standing Committee of Defence oversight visit to several bases in the Western Cape. Some of the observations that the committee made include examples like the SA Navy frigates and submarines that were in urgent need of midlife upgrades, and the SA Air Force having limited maritime patrol capabilities. The additional information here is during engagements with the SANDF, On external deployments, the Joint Standing Committee of Defence also noted concerns around prime mission equipment. For example, the limited number of strategic and tactical airlift platforms available to SANDF forces deployed in Mozambique. Furthermore, we included aspects of the most recent Portfolio Committee oversight visit. During the PCDMV oversight visit to Bloemfontein in December 2022, further concern was expressed around aircraft maintenance, notably the ability of Denel Aviation to maintain the Oryx and Rooivalk fleet of the SA Air Force. The next aspect that we looked at was the reduced training activities, and this just includes specifically SA Navy sea hours and SA Air Force flying hours, and the reductions in those regard. Then there were a number of observations by the committee with some amendments to the observations. Observation number 5, the committee observed an increased reliance on the SANDF for both internal or domestic deployments in support of the SAPs and other government departments, in addition to its external conventional peacekeeping and peace enforcement operations. While aligned to its constitutional mandate, the SANDF is, in some instances, not fully suited, trained, funded, and equipped for these internal deployments. Number 6, the committee acknowledges that the decreasing in real terms defense budgetary allocation is not commensurate with increasing operational and unbudgeted deployment demands being placed on the SANDF. Number 7, the committee notes that the declining defense allocation as a percentage of GDP is of concern, out of step with international trends, and impacts negatively on long-term defense sustainability. The committee notes the ongoing disjuncture between Treasury and the DoD, whereby the department currently has an unfunded organigram and has had this for numerous consecutive years. Neither department has been able to correct this issue, resulting in a funding deficit which impacts on the financial performance of the department. Observation number 10, the committee expressed its concern around the decreased availability of prime mission equipment and inadequate logistical support due to maintenance constraints, as well as a lack of new acquisition initiatives. However, the committee remains hopeful that National Treasury will accede to the requests of the Portfolio Committee in its 2020 BRRR. Chair, we can actually update this further given the news yesterday from the BRRR that many of these requests have been acceded to by National Treasury. So in fact, this observation could be added to from yesterday's information. Committee observation 11, the committee notes decreased training efforts, specifically around prime mission equipment in the SA Air Force and SA Navy. Further engagement by the JSCD also revealed similar concerns around training in other arms of service and especially in the reserve force. And lastly, number 12, the committee concludes that the level of defense readiness of the SANDF, including its conventional and secondary military roles, is deteriorating and is in urgent need of redress to prevent the loss of capabilities and conventional obsolescence. Delays in addressing this decline will impact on the SANDF's ability to fulfill its constitutional mandate. So those were the additions in yellow, Chair and members, to the observations. The recommendations remained largely the same. However, some additions were added. Number 3, for example, the Houses of Parliament should engage the DoD and Treasury to meet with a view to negotiating a solution to the unfunded organizational staff structure. In resolution number 4, or recommendation number 4 to the Houses, this is based on the concerns expressed by the committee in this report regarding the state of defense readiness in South Africa. Both Houses of Parliament should consider a debate on the status of the SANDF, with specific focus on the following. First, the desired roles and functions of the SANDF. Second, the appropriate funding of the SANDF to fulfill its desired roles and functions. Third, the reduced level of force readiness of the SANDF, specifically as it relates to its conventional role and its ability to fulfill its constitutional mandate. And lastly, such a debate should ideally focus on the medium to long-term acquisition and maintenance of prime mission equipment and logistical support equipment to meet the force's conventional operational requirements. Chair, going through this again, some of the aspects have been addressed to an extent through yesterday's budget. However, given that this is the committee's midterm report to the Houses of Parliament, pointing these aspects out remain relevant. We can perhaps just add a sentence that relates to yesterday's budget updates. Chair, I'll hand back to you. I just wanted to update members on the new additions that we saw in yellow, and it's for members to further engage and to consider, and we can do further work on this report if need be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just on the process, I will come back to you, Mr. Murray. Good report. It distills all the discussions that we have had in this committee. If any line, if you go through every single line, you will not find anything that we have not spoken about or that has never been mentioned in any of our committee meetings or engagement with either the department or with the people we invited to talk to us. So once this is a committee, it's going to be a committee report. Can you once more share it with the department and ask them to, because this report, when it gets debated, we want them to have had sight of it and made some input, but in the end, it's our report and we'll incorporate that which we think we accept as a portfolio committee. But because we work with them, we say, this is a committee report, please go through it and then respond and indicate your attitude towards our findings and conclusions in black and white, so that by the time we conclude it, we would have carried the input of the department as well. Mr. Murray?
Chair, thank you very much. Yeah, excellent report. I cannot fault it in any way, except I've just got a question. I've given some information through to Valhelm today, specifically with regards to table 4, where I've just picked up, a total that was not, maybe it was just an omission of one number that I've given them through. So I don't know if that has been taken or accommodated for that in the total. For instance, the total of 49 plus the 22, there was only 2,322, and it should be 72,000. So it seems like Valhelm has done that. Thank you very much. And then just a question of mine, whether that employees with disabilities that is mentioned there in terms of males and females, whether those are included in the 49 in the numbers above, and that is just pointing out how many people with disabilities or employees with disabilities, or will that be addition to the 49,626 and the 22,693? That is all just for my own clarity in that regard. And then otherwise, if I may, I will propose for the acceptance of this report, which is fantastic work. Thank you so much.
Any other comment, colleagues? All right. Mr.
Yeah, I'm happy to second that. Thank you.
Thank you. Valhelm, do you want to comment on the figures?
Chair, just yes to Mr. Murray's observations. Thank you for his input. I did correct the figures in table 4, so that has been updated and corrected. And then secondly, regarding employees with disabilities, I checked this again against the figures in the DoD annual report, and this is included in the total. It is just a way of demonstrating the employees, a number of employees with disabilities within their statistics. So we follow the same format that the department uses. So it is included in the totals as indicated there.
Thank you very much.
Chair, then just on the way forward, you noted that you would like to give the department perhaps an opportunity to give their input or their take on some of the findings that we have in here. I can liaise with the parliamentary liaison officer to share this with Sanele and for him to send it to the relevant people, and maybe we can put a timeline to it so it's not too long. They can get back to us in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And then if there are any specific input to this report, then maybe we can have another slot in 2 or 3 weeks time on the committee's program, and I can just indicate to members if there are any specific inputs from the department that we can consider.
I think that's proper, Willem. I accept the approach you are presenting. It's a committee. It's now a committee report that is being shared with the department to receive their inputs, so that by the time we finalize it, at least we would have consulted them on it as well. In other words, is the committee consulting the department and asking them to input into it before we make it a final report. So it remains a draft report for now. Agreed, colleague?
Chairperson, can I support that? And also then say that the deadline of the 3 weeks that Willem has mentioned and suggested, we must set the target that by the end of this first term of this year, it must be concluded and finalized.
Agreed. So we are aiming to finalize this report before the end of this financial year. Is that what is the end of this financial year?
Term, end of this term. But if we can make it before the end of the financial year, that will be fantastic, because this is about this financial year.
Absolutely.
So,
don't
give
them to a lengthy time. The report is there, consolidated. All we need is their input into it. All right,
exactly.
Colleagues, that is the approach. So the matter will come back to us in the next 3-4 weeks for finalization. Thank you very much. Is there anything, colleagues, that we want to? I mean, there's another item that it's minutes, eh?
Yes, Chair, it's minutes.
How many sets?
Only 2.
Only 2. Okay.
Chairperson,
yes,
just on the agenda is the update on the study tour. We know that I don't know whether they just want to confirm that it has been postponed or whether there's been progress in that regard. But I want to suggest that I have picked up from the communication that we've received from the Secretariat that there seems like a bit of a challenges with regards to certain embassies and other offices to assist us. I have mentioned to Willem that I remember once the CEO of Armscor has suggested that if we need them to assist us with certain arrangements where they have got liaisons with people abroad, they can also assist. And obviously we know that there are SADI members, South African Defence Industry members, and even Denel subsidiaries like RDM and Hensoldt who have got offices in Germany that they can possibly assist. And then just one thing, and I know that the next thing I'm going to suggest, and that's only an idea, we can digest this. But whether we should approach Armscor or one of the others to issue us with a bit of a corporate shirt or anything. I know that they have got stocks of these, so that we can just at least represent South Africa and our defense sector our defense, you know, when we go abroad,
yes.
so that there's a bit of a synergy in that regard. That was just an idea that we can digest.
I mean, when we give them gifts there?
Well, first of all that, but also for us to wear, so that when we are there, you know, that people can see, you know, who we are and who we represent, and that we are proud of our industry and things like that. It's just a suggestion. It's not fixed in stone.
It's fine.
Yeah.
But I would love it more if it's, for example, in the package as tokens of appreciation.
Yeah, that too. That too, most certainly.
People and leave it behind.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it happens. You meet people, they give you something, and you don't give them anything.
Absolutely. And then it's an embarrassment. And then it's an
embarrassment. And in the thing they give you, you can see the symbol of their country or their department. Yeah. So it's very prominent.
Yeah.
So if they can do that, Willem, talk to the team. I agree wholeheartedly with what Mares just said.
I will.
As the way forward. But there's another, I've had the same engagement with Willem that he must talk to AMSCO and SADI in terms of checking if they have any suggestions as to who they think we should see when we are abroad, because they're in that industry.
Yeah.
And then the second,
great minds think alike. Great minds think alike.
Thank you so much. And the second point I raised with Willem, it's, you know, in all the 3 countries we are visiting, there's an item meeting with the Minister of Defense. And I said to Willem, Willem, I think we is not too, are we not over ambitious to want to have a meeting with a defense minister? But I asked him to check if other committees, when they go abroad, they also seek audience with the relevant ministers wherever they go. I know it's quite a mountain to climb. Where possible, we can do it. But Germany, I don't think Germany, the minister there would want to meet, well, he may not say no, but he may find other excuses not to have a meeting with us. But I'm not saying it's a fact, but I'm saying sometimes we are asking too much. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how easy they are to meet, you know, with a portfolio committees. Counterparts, yes. Meeting with our counterparts, yes. But going to that level, meeting of seeking audience with the ministers, we may not get it. But if it is possible, let's all do it. But if not, we must not push for it. I thought I should just say that. Any comment on that?
I agree. I agree that will be a nice to be, but not a must be. That's not primarily why we're going.
Correct. Thank you very much. Yeah. Colleagues, any other thing? I think you were right, Mr. Murray. Are you happy with how we are concluding the item on study tour? Did you have anything to say, Willem?
Chair, just in 1 minute, just to update members, we did post this on the group, but just to provide in 1 minute explanation, we interacted with all the embassies. We've had generally good communication with all the embassies and assistants. Unfortunately, after all the information has been fed back and everything seemed to be on track, the Egyptian embassy came back and they had an engagement with the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who indicated that they are not able to assist us within that month, specifically within the month of Ramadan. They were not able to assist us. And then there was also unavailability of some counterparts in Germany. Not all of them. They actually proposed good alternatives. But given those two factors, and then the earthquake in Turkey, we discussed and perhaps and spoke to the embassies, and decision was made to propose to postpone this to a later, more feasible date. Currently, Chair, where we stand currently is that we've written to all the embassies. I'm waiting for one more embassy to reply to tell us whether the new proposed dates of the 1st of July to around the 13th of July, if those dates are feasible. So far, two of them have indicated there shouldn't be any problems with those dates. I'm just waiting for one more, and as soon as we have that, I will engage with you again. And lastly, perhaps on an administrative note, I just want to say thank you to Nandipa, who's been doing a lot of follow-up work and a lot of admin behind the scenes with the embassies and so forth. So she's been doing great. If there are any members who are still going to receive their passports or need their passports, please follow up on that. And as soon as you have your passport information, please pass it on to Nandipa. We will need it in the short term as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Willem and Nandipa. You have done a good job. The good news is that the trip has been approved as a package. So it means that as soon as we get the date, we'll then take off. I'll then write back to the principals in Parliament, the authorities, to indicate to them that we did not go on that date because of reason ABC, but we are now going on this date because it's confirmed. I said to Nandipa that I will only write back to Parliament once there's certainty that the date have been confirmed, and so that we don't have to go back to them again and again revising the dates. We go back to them with the replacement date that we know is now cast in stone. All right, so that's
Chairperson.
Yes, sir.
No, just a minute. I'm just checking, Chairperson, with that tour. I mean, the issue of the earthquake in Turkey, is it not going to, make it difficult for us? Isn't better maybe we reconsider the issue of earthquake because of that earthquake? I'm just checking because of what has happened recently in Turkey.
Yes, I did ask Willem to keep an eye on that one as well. But we think that in July, possibly the situation, the Turkey situation will be behind them. Of course, they will still be doing some mop-up. But if there's any indication that says, because we're in liaison with our ambassador that is advising us, they are on the ground, they understand the situation better. If they think it's not still too early for us to go there, will I still accept that, and in which case we'll then revise our tour accordingly. But the issue is under our rider, Mr. Mashelembe.
Okay, no, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. All right, colleagues, I don't want to take you beyond 9 o'clock. We can consider the minutes at some other time. Is anything pressing that you want to say in the minute or two before we close the meeting? Do you agree if I defer the minutes to the next meeting?
Agreed.
Agreed. No objection. Colleagues, yes. Tembu, are you wanting to say something?
No, I agree, Chair, about the minutes if we take them on some other time.
Some other time. I think Mr. Rader is also indicating agreement. Colleagues, thank you very much for your time. I think we had a good meeting tonight. Mr. Rader was very well behaved. Thank you.
Oh, deprivation, what's that, a deprivation allowance.
Yeah, I know you must go to Parliament for that. Colleagues, thank you very much.
I dare you, Chair.